All right, let's dive into a truly incredible story today. We're going to talk about Kuru, a mysterious and fatal brain disease that once plagued the Fore people of Papua New Guinea. This isn't just a story about a disease. It's about how solving one terrifying riddle ended up changing the face of modern medicine forever. So, here's the central question, the real paradox at the heart of all this. How could something that was meant as an act of love and respect end up unleashing a deadly plague? It just doesn't make sense, right? Well, that's the mystery we're going to unravel. And it all starts with the name itself. The Fore people called it Kuru. And what does that mean? It means to tremble or to shiver. It's this simple, chillingly accurate description of that first sign, that uncontrollable shaking that told you something was horribly, horribly wrong.
So let's put ourselves in the shoes of Western scientists back in the 1950s. They show up and they're just completely baffled. What they were seeing was this relentless, almost predictable progression of a disease that looked like nothing they'd ever encountered before.
And when I say predictable, I mean it. It was like clockwork, broken down into these three awful stages. First, the ambulatory stage. You'd start with an unsteady walk, some tremors. The Fore had this incredibly poetic way of describing it. They called it the swaying of the casuarina tree. But then, things got worse. The sedentary stage hit. You couldn't walk anymore. The tremors became violent. And finally, the terminal stage. Bedridden, unable to talk, unable to swallow, death was inevitable, usually from pneumonia or simply starvation.
You might have heard Kuru called the laughing death. And that's maybe the most terrifying part of this whole story. Because, let's be clear, this wasn't happiness. Not even close. It was a purely neurological symptom, something called pseudobulbar affect. Basically, the brain damage got so bad, it caused these uncontrollable, spontaneous bursts of laughter. It's just a deeply tragic signal of the brain literally falling apart.
So the scientists are stumped. They're looking for a virus, a bacteria, anything, and they're coming up empty. They finally had to realize that the answer wasn't going to be found under a microscope. No. The key to this whole medical mystery was hidden somewhere else entirely, inside the culture of the Fore people.
And this is where things get really interesting. The biggest clue, the one that really blew their minds, was who was getting sick. You can see it right here. It was overwhelmingly adult women and their children. Adult men? Almost never. Now that's not how genetics usually works. Something else was going on. Something within their society was drawing this awful, tragic line.
And the answer, when they found it, was shocking. It was a funeral ritual, a practice known as endocannibalism. But this wasn't about violence. For the Fore, consuming parts of a loved one who had passed away, that was the highest form of love and respect. It was a way to let the spirit of the dead go free, while also keeping a piece of them with you, inside the community.
And this right here, this is what explains that bizarre demographic chart we just saw. The whole ritual was divided by gender. The men, well, they almost never took part. They thought it would make them weak for battle. And if they did, they only ate muscle tissue. But the women and children, they were the main ones involved. And as their act of mourning, they ate the internal organs, including the brain, the single most infectious part of a person who had died from Kuru.
Okay, so connecting the ritual to the disease pattern was a massive leap forward, a huge piece of the puzzle. But you still need hard scientific proof. And the next big breakthrough, you won't believe where it came from. It came from a veterinarian who was studying a brain disease in sheep.
So picture this. It's 1959. A vet, William Hadlow, is just looking at pictures of brain tissue from Kuru victims, and he's just floored. He's seeing these spongy holes, these little microscopic plaques, and it looks exactly like what he's seen in the brains of sheep with a disease called scrapie. So he throws out this wild idea. What if Kuru is just like scrapie? What if it's infectious, but it takes a really, really long time to show up?
Now, proving a slow disease takes a lot of patience. Inspired by Hadlow's idea, a doctor named Carlton Gadusic starts an experiment in 1963. He takes brain tissue from Kuru victims and injects it into chimpanzees. And then, they waited. For 2 full years, absolutely nothing happened. And then, in 1965, one of the chimps started to tremble. It was developing Kuru. That was it, the smoking gun. It proved the disease was transmissible. Gadusic called it a slow, unconventional virus.
But here's the thing. Virus was really just a placeholder, a best guess, because whatever was causing Kuru, it wasn't behaving like any virus or bacteria known to science. This was a totally new kind of killer, one that was about to make scientists tear up their textbooks and rewrite the rules of biology.
I mean, think about this for a second. How can something be infectious if it doesn't have any DNA or RNA? No genetic material at all. You couldn't kill this thing with radiation, it didn't trigger any immune response, so what in the world could it be?
It took until 1982 for someone to come up with an answer, and it was a really radical idea. A scientist named Stanley Prusiner called it a prion. It's short for proteinaceous infectious particle. His theory was that this wasn't a living thing at all. It was just a protein, a single rogue protein that was folded the wrong way, and it acted like a template, forcing healthy proteins to copy its bad fold, and a devastating chain reaction that just ripped through the brain.
This was absolutely revolutionary. I mean, think about it. A virus has DNA, right? It hijacks your cells to make more of itself. A prion? It's just a protein, no genetic code. It doesn't replicate, it converts. It corrupts the proteins you already have. And the craziest part, because it's technically one of your own proteins, just folded incorrectly, your immune system is completely blind to it. It doesn't see a threat at all.
Now, thankfully, the Fore people stopped the practice of cannibalism back in the late 1950s, and that stopped the spread of Kuru. But even though the epidemic ended, the legacy of this disease and everything we learned from it, well, that story was really just getting started. Just look at this number. Over 50 years. That's the longest recorded incubation period for Kuru. The last person known to have died from it passed away in 2009. They were probably infected way back in the 1950s as a child. That incredible, impossibly long delay, that's a terrifying feature of all prion diseases.
And here's something that is just mind-blowing. This epidemic actually drove human evolution, like we could watch it happen. Scientists found this one gene, and you can think of it like a lock on a door. If you had two identical versions of the gene, that's called homozygous, you were highly susceptible. The door was unlocked. But if you had two different versions, heterozygous, you were incredibly resistant. The door was locked tight. So the Kuru epidemic acted as this brutal force of natural selection, weeding out the susceptible and favoring anyone with that genetic advantage.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's a wild story, but why does it matter to us today? Well, it matters a lot, because understanding Kuru literally gave us the playbook for understanding things like mad cow disease. And that core idea, the prion principle of that protein chain reaction, that's now a huge part of the research into Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. We're seeing similar patterns.
And that brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought. The research on the Fore people, it uncovered a totally unique genetic mutation that seems to give complete immunity to prions. So just think about that. Is it possible that the key to fighting some of the world's worst brain diseases, like Alzheimer's, might be hidden in the tragic story of a remote epidemic driven by cannibalism? It's an incredible idea, and the answer? Well, it's still being written.